Let's do it. So God willing, we are now in Shmuel Bet, the second book of Shmuel, and we're in the middle of Perek Aleph. We're really wrapping up the events of the end of the first book, which is the death of Shaul HaMelech. You recall the Plishtim came out with a vicious attack against the Jews, and it is there that the king of Israel, Shaul, died. Did he commit suicide or attempt it, and then an Amaleki lad finished the job? We discussed how that was ambiguous. But last time, David received report of the death of Shaul, and he mourned it bitterly, and he even punished the Amaleki who reported it and took credit for doing it. And that's where we last left off. And now, in the middle of chapter 1, which is specifically it is verse number 17, we have the Kina of David, the lament or the dirge of David. Is a very sad song that David HaMelech wrote, mourning the loss of Shaul, the king, and his beloved friend, Jonathan. So this is where we're picking up chapter 1, verse number 17. And it says, Vaikonein David es hakina hazos al Shaul ve'al Yonatan beno. He made this dirge, this lament, specifically for Saul and Shaul's son, Yonatan. Vayomer, and he said, L'lamed b'nei Yehuda kashet, hinech tuva al sefer yashar. So since this is a song, and it's written poetically, every verse is given to several meanings. So we're not going to go super in depth, but this opening line is significant. It says, the opening line is to teach the children of Judah. Kashet is like archery, how to use a bow and arrow. What is that the opening line of the dirge for? So there's several explanations. All of them reflect a new reality. The one is, David is saying, I know we just suffered a great loss, but David now as the leader is saying, but we're going to continue to fight. Don't be crestfallen. Don't despair. We're going to pick up our arms and fight against the Plishtim. So here he is encouraging his people, although he's about to be in bitter mourning in the rest of the song, he wants to encourage everyone, we're going to pick up our arms and fight. The other pshat is that this is part of the lament because he's saying, now we need to train ourselves to use weapons. So long as Shaul was around and Yonatan was around, we had their spiritual merit protecting us. Now that they're gone, the Lamed B'nei Yehuda Kashet, we have to take up arms. Like the Gemara says, upon the death of certain tzaddikim, certain righteous people, certain things happened. Enemies came, or their crops got ruined. We have to appreciate that a tzaddik, a righteous person protects his generation. Actually, we just had that in this past week's parsha we read on Shabbat. Moshe told the spies to look at the land and see hayesh ba'etz. Is there a tree there or not? Which Chazal interpret to mean, is there a righteous person there who will protect his people like a tree that offers shade to those who sit under it? Is there a righteous person whose merits protect them? So here David is saying, now we need to learn how to use weapons because Shaul and Yonatan are gone. The Abarbanel says, a beautiful pshat, he learns the word keshet, which means bow, archery, also could be interpreted as kasheh, difficulty and despair. David is specifically addressing Bnei Yehuda, the sons of Judah, which is the one tribe which is probably a little bit bitter and happy that Shaul is dead. And Shaul is chasing David. David had support from his tribe, and thank God, he's dead now. So David is training his men to say, no, you have to feel the difficulty, the kashet, the despair of the loss of a righteous person and his son. Amazing, right? So on the one hand, he's saying, don't despair, we're going to take up arms. On the other hand, he's saying, we've lost the great spiritual protection of Shaul and Yonatan. And he's also saying to his men, specifically to Bnei Yehuda, that don't celebrate upon his death. We need to mourn it because he was a great person. In summation, you see this is a tremendously humble and remarkable thing that David is doing. His life is spared, his pursuer is finally gone, but his reaction to it is nothing but pain and sorrow for the loss of a righteous person. Okay. Hinech tuval sefer yashar. It is the end of the verse. It is written in the book of the upright. This refers to Sefer Bereshis, where over there in the bracha of Yehuda specifically it says, what is it? Yatecha be'oref oivecha, Rashi quotes. That your hand will be on the neck of your enemies, that Yehuda has the power to defeat the enemies of the Jewish people, so David is speaking specifically to them. Okay, next verse is number 19. Hatzvi Yisrael, the beloved and desired one of Israel. This is referring to Shaul, who is beloved and desired. Alternatively, it could be referring to the land of Israel itself. Eretz Tzvi, a desirable land. Al Bamotecha Chalal, and he mourns and he says, Dear Israel, on your high places is a corpse. Eich naflu giborim, how the mighty have fallen. That's where that line comes from. I think it's an expression in English, how the mighty have fallen. It comes from here. This is the source. Actually, this is going to be repeated. Eich naflu giborim, how the mighty have fallen, appears 3 times in this song. Seems like it was some sort of refrain. Could be David had trained people to say it back to him. It was part of like a chorus or something. And the question is, Eich naflu giborim, when a person wants to express an overwhelming feeling, we don't confine it. Rather, we ask a rhetorical question that cannot be answered. On the flip side of this one is Mi kamocha ba'elim Hashem, who is like you amongst the powers of God? Meaning nobody's like you. But I can't say no one's like you. That's like confining. I can't make an absolute statement. I can only ask the question which invites an ever greater answer. Who is like you? So here also, how could it be that the mighty have fallen? It's such a tremendous tragedy, and they were so righteous. It shouldn't be this way. How could it be? How could it be? Al tagidu, next verse. Al tagidu v'gat al tevasru b'chutzot Ashkelon. Don't spread the news to our enemies, lest the Plishtim rejoice. Hooray, hooray Gilboa, al tal ve'al matar lechem. Now David does something very interesting. He turns to the actual mountain where the death took place, which is the Mount Gilboa, and he says, a curse, no dew or rain should fall upon you. Uzdei trumot, kisham nigal magen gibrim, nor should you have a field of exalted produce or a field from which you could take truma. He curses the mountain that it should lay barren and not be able to produce fruit. Fascinating. Like there should forever be a physical memory of the tragedy that happened on this particular mountain. I'm curious to, like nowadays, I think we know where Har Gilboa is. I'd be curious to see what it looks like. Maybe a Google Earth, I don't know if they do any farming over there. I assume not. I assume that it stayed pretty decrepit.
Did David know that Shaul's death was essentially pre-programmed by Hashem?
That's a good point. I suspect not. He hears the news from the Amaleki boy, and he doesn't know that God told him through the necromancer that he's going to die tomorrow. I don't think so.
Okay.
We call our Gilboa today has an awful lot of growth on it, plant growth.
Like, what do you mean by plant? Like weeds and stuff, or crops?
No, there are 170 identified plant species on the mountain, including some of the most famous flowers that grow in Israel today.
How interesting. Would that contradict David's curse? Or it's at least not a fruit field?
Well, there are pictures of what appear to be olive trees, but it's Wikipedia where the pictures are, so who knows?
I hear. Well, I deny everything, because David said it shouldn't be. Interesting.
We learned about this morning.
Very good. Yeah. Very good. Touche. Okay. Kisham nigal magen giborim, magen she'u bli mashiach bashamin. Over there on that mountain was rejected the shield of the mighty, specifically the shield of Shaul, bli mashiach bashamin, which was not, as if it wasn't anointed with oil. Back then, their shields were made of leather. They had a tough leather, and they would actually soak them in oil or anoint them with oil so that they should be slippery and any arrows shouldn't penetrate. They should just slide right off. So here, Shaul, his shield is as if it wasn't anointed with oil. Everything just slides right off. Everything was able to penetrate rather than slide away. He was hit. He was struck. I think this expression is saying like David is really astonished. It's not just somebody died and now we have to give a eulogy. David is astonished. How could this be? It's like we were missing a basic security system. Every soldier anoints his shield when he goes to war. And Shaul should have definitely been protected. He's righteous and he's an amazing fighter. His son Jonathan was able to single-handedly defeat so many Plishtim. It doesn't make any sense. It's as if David's recognizing that there's something that's supernatural here that intervened and led to the downfall of Shaul. I don't understand how he could die. It's as if his shield wasn't anointed. You see that he was really bewildered. This is not just your regular, every eulogy is sad and every death is untimely. But here, this took David by shock. Last time we read in the beginning of the chapter, when they heard the news of Shaul's death, they cried until they didn't have any more energy to cry. So you see how hard this was for David. Okay. Next verse is 22. Midam chalalim michelev giborim keshet Yonatan lo nasog achor lecherev Shaul lo tashuv reikam. Now David is praising the courage of Jonathan and Saul, and he's saying that although they were faced apparently by enemies, they did not turn away, not from the blood of corpses, nor from the fat of the mighty ones. This either means, there's two ways you could read it in the Mefarshim, they weren't afraid of the death of their brethren, even though they saw that the other Israelites were dying. They didn't turn away. They went headlong into battle. And not only that, but as Mr. Fox just mentioned, they knew they were going to lose this battle. I don't know if David knew that, but that just shows you the courage and bravery that they had. The other way to read this would be referring to Dam Chalalim, is just saying that they spilled a lot, they dropped a lot of corpses of the enemy. They were tremendous fighters. They were able to overcome the enemy. Okay. And now in verse number 23, we have a line that we've actually borrowed and we utilized for the prayer of Av Harachamim, special prayer we say on Shabbos for people who were murdered, Al Kiddush Hashem, in sanctifying Hashem's name. And it says, Shaul v'Yonatan ha'ne'avim v'ne'imim b'chayayim, those who were beloved and pleasant during their lifetime. This is the way David views Shaul, beloved and pleasant. He really means it. Uvmotam lo nifradu, and in their death, they do not part. Meaning, we still feel connected to them. But specifically, let me pull up my notes. There was a nice pirush on this one.
Well, doesn't that also imply that they both died together?
Oh, very good. That they didn't, even in their death, they didn't separate. Yeah, I don't know how he would know that. And I wonder if it's, I mean, it was in the same battle that they died. But I don't know.
But if it's saying that the fact that Jonathan and his father died together,
they did not separate,
as opposed to being parted from the body of people.
So what does it mean that they didn't part? I thought it was they didn't part. I recall seeing they didn't part from their brethren. Like we still feel connected to them. You're saying they didn't part from one another? Is that what you're saying?
Well, not, in other words, even though they're dead, their spirit is still within us.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
That's okay. That's one interpretation.
Yeah.
The other perspective is, but they died together in battle, so they are together in death themselves as father and son.
I hear. That'd be an interesting. Yeah, nice. The Radak says, even though they knew they were going to die, they didn't separate themselves from God, and they didn't flee. So I don't know if that means that David knew about the prophecy, or maybe he realized, like, there was probably a point in the war when they realized they were doomed, and they still proceeded. Rather than running away, showing their bravery and emunah in Hashem. Okay. Minasharim kalu me'arayot kaveru. They were as light as eagles who can soar amongst the highest, and they were even braver than lions. These are the roots for, there's a Mishnah, Yehuda ben Tema Omer. Yehuda ben Tema tells us the qualities we should learn from animals to serve Hashem. We should be light like an eagle and mighty like a lion, etc. And he lists Az Kanamer, brazen like a tiger, to do the will of Hashem. Every Mishnah in the Torah Sheba'al Peh has its roots in the written Torah, and the Gra in his commentary on Avos that tries to connect every single Mishnah to a pasuk. And I haven't checked here, but I imagine this is where that one is. Okay. Now comes an interesting line. In verse number 24, it says, Benot Yisrael, El Shaul Bechena, daughters of Israel, cry for Shaul. Why? Hamalbishchem shani imadanim, because he would dress you in beautiful clothes and give you jewelry. Rashi says, when they would go out to war, Shaul would make sure that the wives of the soldiers were taken care of. He would pamper them with clothing and jewelry. A beautiful thought. You know, the nervous wife or mother of the soldier sits at home just anxious. Shaul is sending her gifts and pampering her to make it a little bit easier, which shows the beautiful sensitivity of Shaul. But there's an interesting additional layer here. You recall what sparked the jealousy of Shaul was exactly the Benot Yisrael, the daughters of Israel. Their song after returning from war, David and Shaul had slayed the Plishtim, they sang, Yikah Shaul ba'alafav, Shaul struck the thousands and David the myriads. And that's what actually initiated this whole disaster, the whole jealousy between Shaul and David. So it's interesting that he's turning to them specifically and saying, you should mourn for Shaul. I don't know if he's pointing a finger, but just it's interesting that they get a line dedicated to them in the song. And then again, he finishes, Eich naflu giborim, how the mighty have fallen in the inside of the war. And now he turns to lament specifically, Jonathan, Yehonatan, Albamotecha Chalal, on your high place, you lay a corpse. A high place is not a place where a skilled soldier should lose. If you have the high ground, you're in an advantage. You can look down and see the enemy coming. And Albamotecha Chalal, and even on your high place, you are a corpse. Again, it's David expressing his shock and disbelief that this has happened. Sarli alecha achi Yehonatan. I feel pain for you, my brother Jonathan. He's actually his brother-in-law, but you sense that it's more than just a legal connection that they have. Achi Yehonatan means he felt like he was his brother, and he even says, Niflata ahavatcha li me'ahavat nashim. Your love for me, or my love for you, however you want to read it, is greater, is more wondrous than the love of women. What does that mean? Your love for me, or our love, is more wondrous than the love of women. So the simple meaning is more than David's two wives. I love you more than I love Abigail and Achinoam. I love you more than my own wives. You loved him so much. The Matsudos explains specifically because when one loves, when a man loves a woman, there could be like an external motive there because of her physical beauty or because of that unique relationship that men and women share. But when it comes to the love of Jonathan, there's no ulterior motive. I just love you for no reason other than the love itself. So in that way, it exceeds the love of women. Alternatively, or additionally, again, in a poem, it can mean multiple things. More than women love their husband, I love you. I mean, a woman has a natural love and she feels support and connection with her husband, but I feel greater than that for you. So in this case, he's making himself the woman. The Ramami Pano, the art scroll brings down very beautifully. Jonathan's love was like the love of women, plural, referring specifically to Rachel and Leah. Rachel and Leah, the two wives of Yaakov, were co-wives, which is naturally a relationship of hatred. They're jealous of one another. They're fighting over getting their husband's attention. But that wasn't the case with Rachel and Leah. Even though they were both vying for the same square, they loved and supported each other. Rachel protected Leah from embarrassment by giving her the signs. Leah gave Rachel the flowers when necessary, and they loved each other and supported each other. Similarly, or even greater than that, David is saying, Jonathan, even though he was the proper heir to Shaul's throne, and therefore he should be jealous or upset at David, he supported him even more than Rachel supported Leah. So that's very, okay, a few different explanations of this interesting line. And then finally finishes the song, how the mighty have fallen, and the instruments of war have been lost, meaning their spiritual merit and the fact that they were physical fighters that were very good. Okay, and so ends the Dirge of David. And now we pick up in the regular tangles that follow a death, complex relationships and politics, and it's going to get juicy and gruesome. Okay. After this, following the death of Shaul, David inquires of God, what do I do next? Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. What's happening? There was just a massive war. The Plishtim were fighting and defeated the Jews in the south. David had to go back to Tziklag, which is Plishti territory, which is where he is now. You can imagine that Achish had probably not come back yet. Achish, the king of the Plishtim, had not returned yet. And so David has to act fast. What do I do? Do I stay here and I'm going to have to continue faking to be a supporter of the enemy? Or what do I do? So he asks God, should I get out of here, out of Plishti territory, and go into the territory of Yehuda, my people? Shaul is gone now, so I'm not really in danger amongst the Jews. So should I go back? So Hashem says to him, yes. And you can only ask one question at a time. So now comes the follow-up. Vayomer David, Ana Eileh, to where should I go? Specifically, which part of Judah should I go to? Vayomer Chevrona, you should go to Chevron. An interesting thing. Chevron is the place where it was actually the first part of Eretz Yisrael which belonged to the Jewish people. The plot that Avram purchased from Ephron, that is where the cave of Machpelah is, where our forefathers are buried, and our mothers, our matriarchs, and Adam and Chava are buried. It is as important as Yerushalayim is. Chevron also has tremendous significance. It's called the Shara Shamayim. It's the gateway to heaven, where tefillas pass through. There's a mystical connection between Yerushalayim and Chevron. Chevron is a very central spot. And just like Chevron was the first part of the acquisition of Israel, it will also be the beginning of David's reign, which emanates from Chevron. The Zohar writes that the reason Hashem sent David to Chevron is because at the outset, to begin his reign, he needed to connect with the spiritual merit, or he needed to connect with the Avos that were buried there, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, and Leah. Okay, so David goes to Hebron along with his two wives, Achinoam HaYisraelit, Avigail, Eshet Naval HaKarmeli. So he goes with Achinoam and Avigail, and once again we see Avigail referred to as the wife of Naval the Carmelite. I just saw, because every time it comes up, she's mentioned by her old husband's name, which is so strange. So Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky suggests we're going to see later that David had a sister named Avigail. And therefore, to avoid confusion, the Navi always referred to his wife Avigail as the wife of Naval. Because if he just wrote Avigail, you might think David was going up with his sister. So you have to clarify. That's a suggestion of Yaakov Kamenetsky. Although I don't find it so deeply satisfying. Maybe there's another, at least it's an explanation. Because other than that, it's just so strange that this is her permanent title in the Sefer. And David also comes up with families. The fact that he's going with their families, which means the women and children, implies that he's not going up to war. They're going up to settle. David feels safe. He doesn't feel like he's going into battle. Hashem told him to go to Hebron. I'm there, and we're going to bring our families with us. Everyone's going to ride their scooters. There's no threat. Vayishvu be'arei Hebron, and they dwelled in the cities of Hebron. That's also significant. They didn't concentrate into one place, but rather they scattered themselves amongst the cities of Hebron which again shows that they were not here to take military action. They were scattered, and they felt secure with the promise of Hashem that they had to go there. Okay, the men of Yehuda come and they anoint David, which means they take oil and they put it on his head to appoint him, to make him the king. Somebody ask a question? No. They anoint David. And they, okay, so why do they have to anoint him? Don't you remember Shmuel is the one that anointed David originally, so why do you have to anoint him a second time now? The answer to that is that the original anointment of Shmuel, David was never the king effectively. He was just fit to be the king. He's no longer committing treason if he does kingly things, but he's not a functioning king. And here, by anointing him actively, the men of Yehuda were saying, we want you to act as our king now. So this is day one on the job, really, for David HaMelech when he gets anointed in Hebron. And they tell him, Vayagidu LaDavid Lemor Anshei Yavesh Gilad Asher Kavru et Shaul. They also informed David of the act of the men of Yavesh Gilad. You'll recall last week, the city of Yavesh Gilad that fell a debt of gratitude to Shaul. They went on a rescue mission to get the body of Shaul so they could bury him in a respectful way. The Plishtim were degrading and defacing the body of Shaul. They chopped off his head and they hung up his body by the idol. And the men of Yavesh Gilad did an operation to rescue that body and bury him. And now David is told about this. Now maybe they were tattling. They thought that David would be upset, or maybe they realized that David would be happy with this. David was indeed happy. In verse number 5, David sends messengers and he says to them, Baruchim atem laHashem, you are blessed to God that you have done this kindness with Shaul and buried him. Hashem will also repay you, chesed ve'emes, and I've got your back. Meaning, they probably felt afraid right now. Okay, we got the body out, but now we've just endangered our entire people. We upset the Plishtim. They might find out who did it. And we're in danger. So David is saying, I will protect you. Here's the king offering these men his protection. Okay. And then he says to them in verse number 7, be strong, and you should know that they have anointed me the king in Yehuda. Shaul is dead, as you know, and they've anointed me the king, as if to tell them, like, I'm offering you protection, and it's not just the promise of an individual, that's the promise of the king. Okay, now, yeah, go ahead.
Word on Jonathan's body?
I was just trying to recall, was that also part of what was rescued? No, you know what? I don't think that Jonathan was actually taken. I just realized. It just said that Jonathan fell on the battlefield. Since he was not the king, the Plishtim just left him. Right. Who knows if they even recognize his body? Right? It was the king specifically that they were after.
The pasuk is not clear because the first pasuk says, pasuk tet says, they cut off Shaul's head and took off his armor and fastened his body to the wall. Pasuk Yud.
Yeah.
The pasuk in Yud Bet says that the people of Yavesh Gilad took his and his son's bodies down.
Very good, very good. Yeah, you're right. Good point. So it does imply that they took the sons as well, and that they were also rescued. Yeah, very good. Shmuel, you're suggesting they probably knew who his son were based on his armor. I mean, it wasn't the first time that they faced Jonathan, specifically Jonathan. He was on the front line often. He's the one who initiated the original war with them. Yeah, good point. Very good. Thank you for that, Moshe. Okay. Now things get a little messier. Avner ben Ner, Sartzava Asher LaShaul. Avner, remember, was Shaul's army general. And he takes Ish-Boshes, the son of Shaul that we haven't really heard about. All the other sons of Shaul had died in the war, Ish-Boshes was the only remaining son, and Avner takes him and he brings him to Machanaim. Machanaim is a place that sits between the eastern Jordan area to Eretz Yisrael proper. So he takes him to this central location which connects between a lot of tribes, a nice intersection. And he makes him king. So Avner is trying to take the reins over here, and he's saying, no, I'll decide who's the next king. And he makes Avner the next king. Excuse me. And he makes Ish-Boshes, the son of Shaul. He's the only remaining heir. He anoints him as the king. And that slowly expands. Ve'el Ashuri, Ve'el Israel, Ve'el Ephraim, Ve'el Binyamin, Ve'el Israel Kula. It expands from one tribe to the next until it goes over all of Israel. Meaning the Jewish people actually accepted Ish-Boshes as their king. Shaul was first, and this is his son. It's only natural that he takes over. So now you have a situation where David is serving as king in Yehuda only, and we have a second king over the rest of Israel. Yeah. But is Ish-Boshes a cripple? Where do you have that from? Do you have any source for that, Shmuel?
One of Shaul's sons was a cripple, either Ish-Boshet or I'm blanking on the other name now.
Jonathan's son was a cripple.
Have we seen that, or that's in the future?
Yeah, it's in there.
We had that when the sons went to war.
Right.
Some stayed behind.
Yehonathan's son Mephibosheth was the cripple.
Oh, very good. Okay. Yeshakar. Okay, so that's a different, same last name, same second name, Bosheth. Yeah. Okay, there's a little bit of an aside on the word Bosheth. Maybe we'll talk about it next time. I don't want to go off the rails here. The name Ish-Boshet means the man of shame or man of embarrassment. It's interesting. We've had that name elsewhere. Maybe I'll do a thing on it later. Okay. So they make Ish-Boshet the king. Ben Arba'im Shana Ish-Boshet ben Shaul B'Machol Yisrael, and he was 40 years old when he became the king. Ushtaim Shani Malach, and he ruled for 2 years. Ach Beit Yehuda Hayu Acharei David. However, Yehuda specifically followed after David, and David was king in Hebron for 7 years and 6 months. Before later we'll see that in Jerusalem he reigned for longer. So first he was king only over Yehuda for 7.5 years, and then it's going to spread for the rest of Bnei Israel. Ish-Boshes was king for 2 years, which means at some point there was a 5-year gap where there was no king over Israel, only David was king over Yehuda, right? When were the 2 years of Ish-Boshet? It was either right after Shaul's death, which is maybe what the verse implies, or it was towards the end. There was a 5-year delay. It's actually Machloket Rashi and Tosfos in Sanhedrin. Was it the first 2 years after his death, or the final 2 years before David took over? It's an interesting thing to note. Either he began his reign right away and it just petered out, like he didn't have enough strength, or this is the Abarbanel's approach. There was a 5-year delay because the people said, we don't need a king. Look at what happened the first time. When we asked for a king, Shmuel was upset at us. We got Shaul, and it ended up bad. We don't want a king. And for 5 years, they were rejecting accepting any king until finally Avner was able to convince them to accept Ish-Boshes as the successor, which is very interesting. That was a noteworthy thing. What was the motive of Avner? Was he trying to be vicious here and beat David to the finish line? Oh, I made a king before you became the king. So interestingly, the Midrash says, and I'm not sure if it's saying it's a positive motive or pernicious, but the Midrash says that Avner was basing himself on a pasuk in Bereshis. Yaakov was told, upon leaving the house of Lavan, Hashem told Yaakov, don't be afraid, I'm going to protect you. And he says to him, U'malachim mechalatzecha yetzeu, melachim, and kings will come from your loins. Which means Hashem was promising another child, Benjamin, and that child will produce a king, which was Shaul, but it doesn't say king, it says kings, which is 2. So Avner said, there must be 2 kings coming from Benjamin. So Shaul was the first. It's not time for David to reign yet. It says in the Torah that you have to have 2 kings from Benjamin. So therefore, it must be Ishbosheth, who's the only one around. So he gives him the kingship in fulfillment of the verse in Bereshis. That's the way the Medrash puts it. And therefore, it's not really clear that Avner was doing anything wrong here. Interesting. Question, was Ishbosheth his real name, or was he called that because he was physically disabled, so he was king? Ishbosheth was not physically disabled, but it's a question whether his name was Ishbaal or Ishbosheth. We'll talk about it. There's a verse in, I think it's in Divrei Yamim, which gives him a different name. We'll talk about it next time, Shmuel. Good question. My lights are flashing. I'm not sure if it's happening to you as well. Okay. Hope you appreciate the disco lighting. Okay. We'll just finish up now. Okay, you know what? Maybe this is a good place to stop. The next time we meet, we're going to talk about the bloody duel between Avner's men and David's men. They're going to meet. It's going to be not pretty, and it's going to lead to like a mini civil war, which is quite tragic. And that's going to actually set up David, because with the death of Avner, the army general, is now going to be clear road for David to become the king of Israel. Okay, but God willing, we'll pick up on that next week. Did Avner not reign as king at all? Yeah. Eshukah, have a wonderful night.
Thank
Shmuel,
you.
thank you. Good night. Well
Bye.
played. Shmuel, you just asked, was Ishbosheth? Oh, so did Avner reign as the king in all things except in name? That's an interesting point. He was the army general. Avner, was he like kind of pulling the strings of the king? It's not clear. The army general does have a lot of power. I don't know if he was manipulating Ishbosheth. It's not clear. We don't really have so much information about the 2-year reign.
You know anything about Chinese history?